The flight was supposed to be routine. A long international journey. Hundreds of passengers settled into their seats, lights dimmed, engines humming in a steady rhythm that made most people feel safe enough to sleep. The woman in the cockpit had done this route many times before. She was experienced, calm, and deeply focused. To the passengers, she was just another pilot behind a closed door. To the airline, she was expected to follow procedures exactly as written. Nothing more. Nothing less. As the plane climbed higher, weather reports began to change. What looked like a manageable system on the radar slowly grew darker and wider. Thick clouds stretched far beyond the expected zone. The co-pilot read out updates from air traffic control, their voices calm but careful. Orders were clear: stay on the assigned route. Fuel calculations, scheduling pressure, and airspace rules all pointed in one direction: forward. Inside the cockpit, the woman pilot watched the instruments closely. Small signs began to worry her. Wind speeds were rising faster than forecast. Turbulence ahead was not behaving like normal turbulence. She had seen this pattern before, years ago, during training simulations, and once during a near miss early in her career. It was the kind of situation where waiting too long could close. All safe options. She asked for updated data. The numbers did not feel right. The storm was growing faster than the system predicted. Lightning flickered in the distance, visible even in daylight. The plane shook slightly, nothing alarming yet, but enough to tell her that the atmosphere ahead was unstable. Air traffic control repeated the instruction: maintain course. Other aircraft were following the same path. No emergency had been declared. From the outside, it looked like everything was under control, but inside her mind, she felt a quiet pressure building. She thought of the people behind her, families, traveling together, elderly passengers gripping armrests when the plane moved, children pressing their faces to the windows, crew members walking the aisle, trusting the cockpit without question. 418 lives depended on decisions made in this narrow space filled with screens and switches. She remembered something an old instructor once told her: rules exist to protect life, but judgment exists to save it when rules fall. Behind reality, the turbulence suddenly intensified. The plane dropped slightly, then recovered. Seatbelt signs flashed on. In the cabin, conversation stopped. A few nervous gasps could be heard. Flight attendants took their seats, faces professional but alert. The co-pilot looked at her, waiting. She requested permission to alter course, just a small deviation to avoid the most dangerous section of the storm. The response came back firm and short: negative, maintain heading. Traffic congestion ahead. Limited options. Her hands stayed steady, but her heart rate rose. She ran calculations again. Fuel was tight, but manageable if they diverted early. If they waited, fuel burn would increase, fighting headwinds and turbulence. Worse, the storm could close the gap entirely. Another jolt hit the aircraft, stronger this time. A warning light blinked briefly, then disappeared. Not a failure, but a signal. The kind that experienced pilots do not ignore. She took a deep breath. In that moment, she was not thinking about career consequences, reports, or investigations. She was thinking about responsibility, about the weight of command, about what it truly meant to be in charge when others could not see what she saw. She informed the co-pilot of her decision. They would turn now, before it was too late. The co-pilot hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. Trust flowed between them without words. She announced the maneuver to the cabin in a calm, steady voice. A slight course adjustment, she said, for comfort and safety, nothing alarming. Her tone mattered. Passengers listened more to how she spoke than what she said. As the plane began to turn, air traffic control immediately questioned the move. This was not approved. She acknowledged the message but continued to turn, explaining the weather risk ahead. Her voice remained respectful. Controlled, professional. Inside the cabin, turbulence increased briefly, then slowly eased. The plane moved away from the darkest part of the storm. Lightning faded into the distance. The violent air became manageable again. Minutes passed. Then more. The radar now showed what she had feared. The route they were ordered to stay on was closing rapidly, swallowed by the storm's core. Aircraft behind them were being rerouted late, some forced to climb or descend sharply to escape. Her plane, now on a different path, had space. Clearer air. Time. 418 people sat unaware of how close they had come to danger. Some returned to their movies. Some fell asleep again. A few whispered quiet prayers. In the cockpit, the woman pilot stayed alert, eyes moving from screen to screen. She knew the hardest part was not over. She had defied orders. There would be questions. There would be scrutiny. But for now, the aircraft was stable. The storm was behind them. And every life on board was still safe. She did not smile. She did not relax. She simply continued to fly. Because for her, this was not about breaking rules. It was about choosing the moment, when doing the right thing mattered more than doing the expected thing. And the real consequences of that choice were still ahead. The message from air traffic control did not stop after the turn. It came again, sharper this time, asking for immediate explanation. The woman pilot listened, acknowledged, and kept her voice steady. She explained the storm movement, the radar readings, the sudden change in wind behavior. On the other end, there was a pause, not agreement, not approval. Just silence, followed by a reminder that deviation without clearance would be reviewed. She knew that already. The plane continued on its new path. Outside, the sky still looked heavy, but it no longer felt angry. The violent shaking had softened into light bumps. Inside the cabin, the tension slowly drained. Flight attendants unbuckled and returned to the aisle. Some passengers laughed nervously, making jokes to hide fear. Others checked their phones, hoping for a signal, unaware of how close things had come. In the cockpit, the co-pilot rechecked fuel numbers. They were still within safe limits, but there was no extra margin. The diversion meant they would arrive later than planned. Connections would be missed, schedules would be broken, paperwork would pile up. None of that mattered right now. The woman pilot focused on flying clean and smooth. Her eyes stayed calm, but her mind was busy. She replayed the decision again and again, testing it from every angle. Could she have waited longer? Was there another option? Each time, the answer came back the same. Waiting would have been worse. She remembered earlier days in her career, when she was new and eager to prove herself. Back then, she followed every rule without question. She believed that procedures always knew best. But experience had taught her something else. Systems are designed by people, and people do not always see the full picture in real time. Another update came in. Weather ahead on the original route had become severe. Aircraft were reporting strong vertical movements and hail. Some were requesting emergency descents. Others were being diverted far later than planned. The co-pilot looked at her again, this time with clear understanding in his eyes. In the cabin, one passenger held a child close, whispering softly. Another passenger stared out the window, watching the clouds thin out, feeling relief without knowing why. A flight attendant noticed how the plane felt different now, lighter, calmer, and silently thanked the unseen hands guiding it. The woman pilot made another announcement. She thanked everyone for their patience and explained there might be a delay due to weather avoidance. Her voice carried confidence, not fear. That mattered more than facts in moments like this. As time passed, air traffic control's tone began to shift, less sharp, more focused on coordination. They provided updated routing options. The storm was now officially classified as dangerous. What she had seen early was now visible to everyone. Still, no one said she was right. She did not expect them to. Aviation is careful. It moves slowly when it comes to admitting mistakes or praising rule breaking. She knew the review would come later, in quiet rooms, with data and timelines. For now, the job was not over. The flight continued for hours. Fuel was monitored carefully. Every adjustment was made with precision. The woman pilot stayed alert, refusing to let relief turn into complacency. Many accidents happen after the worst scene's over. Eventually, the aircraft began its descent toward the destination airport. The weather there was calm. Runway lights appeared through the evening haze. The landing was smooth, controlled, almost gentle. Applause broke out in the cabin. Some passengers always clapped, no matter what. This time, it sounded different, louder, more emotional, a release of something they could not fully name. The woman pilot listened, but did not react. She guided the plane to the gate, shut down the engines, and completed the final checks. Only when everything was secure did she allow herself to breathe deeply. As passengers disembarked, some smiled at the crew. A few said thank you with extra warmth. One elderly passenger paused and looked at the cockpit door, placing a hand on it for a moment before walking away. Behind the scenes, messages were already moving. Reports were being filed. Data was being reviewed. Her decision was being replayed on screens by people who were not there when the turbulence hit. Who did not feel the plane drop? Who did not see the storm grow faster than predictions? She knew what was coming. Questions, long meetings, words like protocol and authorization. Possibly warnings, possibly worse. But she also knew something else. 418 people had arrived alive, uninjured, unshaken beyond a few moments of fear. That night, alone in a quiet hotel room, she sat by the window and watched the city lights below. Fatigue finally reached her. Not physical tiredness, but the heavy kind that follows responsibility. She did not feel like a hero. She felt like a professional who had done her job the only way she could. And deep down, she understood that the most difficult part of this story had not happened in the sky. It was about to begin on the ground. The meeting room was quiet, too quiet. The woman pilot sat at the long table with a cup of cold coffee in front of her, untouched. Across from her were screens, documents, and people who had not been on the flight. They spoke in calm, careful voices, using official words that sounded heavy and distant. They replayed the data. Radar images showed the storm growing, but only after a certain minute. Audio recordings played her voice, steady but firm, requesting deviation. Then the moment where she turned before receiving approval. That part was replayed more than once. She listened without interrupting. Questions came next. Why did she act when she did? Why not wait 30 more seconds? Why not request emergency status first? Why not follow the chain exactly as written? She answered honestly. She explained what she saw, what she felt in the controls, how the wind pattern behaved in a way she had learned to recognize over years of flying. She explained that storms do not always wait for permission, and that hesitation can close safe options faster than people realize. Some faces remained unreadable. Others showed quiet interest. One person reminded her that rules exist to keep order in the sky. Another mentioned that deviation creates risk for other aircraft. A third noted that her decision could set a dangerous example if misunderstood. She nodded. She did not argue. Inside, she felt calm. Not because she was confident of praise, but because she had already accepted the outcome, whatever it would be. She knew she had made the decision she could live with. Outside the room, the world had already started to move. Passengers shared stories online about a rough flight that suddenly became calm. Some thanked the crew publicly. Others speculated. News outlets picked up fragments of information and filled gaps with guesses. A headline appeared that afternoon. It spoke about a pilot who diverted unexpectedly to avoid severe weather. It did not mention her name. It did not praise or blame. It simply asked questions. She avoided reading too much. She had learned long ago that public opinion moves faster than truth. Later that day, she received a call from another pilot she respected deeply. Someone who had flown longer, seen more, survived close calls. The voice on the other end was quiet but warm. "You did what many think about," the voice said, "but few are willing to do." That was all. No advice, no warning, just understanding. That night, sleep came slowly. Her mind returned to the cockpit again and again, the moment of the turn, the feel of the aircraft responding, the way the turbulence faded. She wondered what would have happened if she had waited just a little longer. The answer never fully formed, and maybe that was a good thing. The next morning, a report from meteorology confirmed what she had sensed early. The storm had intensified faster than models predicted. Several flights that stayed on the original path experienced severe conditions. One declared an emergency. Another suffered injuries in the cabin. She read the report once, then closed it. The review process continued. Days passed. Each day felt longer than the flight itself. She flew other routes, performed her duties as usual, her voice steady on the radio, her hands precise on the controls. To passengers, she was just another pilot. To colleagues, she was a quiet topic of conversation. Some admired her courage. Some worried about the precedent. Most simply waited to see what the decision-makers would do. Then, a message arrived asking her to attend one final session. This time, the tone was different. The room felt less tense. The questions were fewer. Data was presented clearly, without sharp edges. The timeline showed how narrow the window had been, how quickly the safe corridor closed, how early action had created space. No one said the word hero. Instead, someone said something else. Your decision reduced risk. In aviation, that sentence carried weight. There was still discussion about procedures, about communication, about improving weather response systems. There always would be, but the focus shifted from her action to the system itself. When the meeting ended, she walked out into the open air and felt something lift from her chest. Not pride, not victory, just relief. Later that week, she received a message forwarded from the airline. A simple note from a passenger. No dramatic words, no exaggeration. "Thank you for getting us home safely," it said. "I don't know what happened up there, but I felt safe. That mattered." She read it twice. In that moment, she realized something important. The story was no longer just about defying orders or facing reviews. It was about trust. The kind passengers place in voices they cannot see. The kind that depends on judgment, not just rules. She looked out at the runway as another aircraft lifted into the sky, disappearing into clouds. The world would keep flying. Storms would keep forming faster than predictions. Systems would improve, but never perfectly. And somewhere, someday, another pilot would face a moment where seconds mattered more than permission. When that moment came, she hoped they would remember this truth. That sometimes, doing the right thing is not loud. It is quiet, steady, and carried out at 30,000 feet with 418 lives behind a closed door. Weeks passed, but the flight did not fade from memory. Not for her, and not for many others who had quietly followed what happened next. Officially, the incident was labeled a weather deviation event. The words were clean and technical, but they did not carry the weight of the choice made in the air. For the woman pilot, life returned to routine on the surface. New routes, new crews, new passengers who would never know what had happened before they boarded. She followed procedures, completed checklists, and spoke calmly over the radio, just as she always had. Yet something inside her had changed. Not in a dramatic way. In a quieter, deeper way. She noticed it in small moments. The way younger pilots listened more closely when she spoke. The way co-pilots trusted her judgment without hesitation. Even the way instructors referenced real-world judgment more often during briefings, without naming her or the flight. Behind closed doors, training departments were talking. Meteorologists were reviewing how fast that storm had grown. New simulations were being built around rapid weather shifts, inspired by data from her flight. No one announced these changes publicly, but they were happening. The system was learning. One afternoon while waiting between flights, she overheard a conversation nearby. Two passengers were talking about a story they had read online. A woman pilot, they said, who had turned a plane early and avoided something terrible. One of them shrugged and said, "She was lucky." The other replied, "Or maybe she was smart." The pilot said nothing. She simply smiled to herself and walked away. Luck is often what people call decisions they do not fully understand. A letter arrived a few days later. Not an official notice, not a warning. A simple envelope forwarded through internal mail. Inside was a handwritten note from a flight attendant who had been on the aircraft that day. The handwriting was careful, thoughtful. The note spoke about the moment when the turbulence stopped, about how the cabin felt different, calmer, safer, about how the crew trusted the cockpit without needing explanations. It ended with a single line of gratitude. She folded the letter and placed it in her bag. She did not frame it or show it to anyone. Some things are meant to stay private. As the months went on, the story slowly changed shape. It was no longer just about a rule being broken. It became about early action, about listening to experience, about understanding that safety is not a checklist, but a living process. She was invited to speak during a safety workshop, not as a headline speaker, just as someone sharing a scenario. She described the flight without drama, no emotional language, just facts, sensations, timing. She spoke about how hesitation can be more dangerous than action when conditions are changing faster than expected. The room was silent when she finished. A young pilot raised a hand and asked, "How did you know it was the right moment?" She paused before answering. "I didn't know," she said honestly. "I judged, and I accepted the responsibility of being wrong." That answer stayed with many people. Later, a senior safety officer approached her and thanked her quietly. He said her explanation had helped others understand something hard to teach in manuals. The space between rules and reality. Outside aviation, the story continued to ripple. Articles appeared and disappeared. Online discussions flared and faded. Some praised her, some criticized her. The internet moved on, as it always does, but inside the industry, something steady remained. On a long overnight flight months later, cruising through calm skies, she looked at the stars above the clouds. The aircraft moved smoothly, as if floating. Most passengers slept, trusting the quiet hum around them. She thought about how invisible safety really is. When it works, no one notices. When it fails, everyone asks why. She did not regret the decision. Not because it ended well, but because it was made with care, experience, and responsibility. Even if the outcome had been different, she knew she would have acted the same way, because leadership, she had learned, is not about being seen. It is about carrying weight, so others do not have to. The flight continued, steady and uneventful. Another safe journey. Another quiet success. And somewhere far behind her, in the past, there was still that storm. Still that moment. Still that turn in the sky that changed the path of 418 lives. The world did not stop for it. History did not mark it loudly, but for those who understand what it means to choose under pressure, it remained a powerful reminder. Sometimes, the bravest decisions leave no scars, no headlines, no applause. Only people arriving home safely, never knowing how close they were to not arriving at all. Time moved forward, but the story did not fully rest. Not for the woman pilot, and not for the system around her. Months after the flight, subtle changes became visible. They were not announced with speeches or press releases. They appeared quietly, the way real progress often does. Weather briefings became longer. Sudden storm growth was discussed more seriously. Dispatch teams began asking pilots more questions instead of giving firm directions. Experience was given a little more space she noticed it during pre-flight discussions. People listened differently now. When she spoke about weather behavior, no one rushed her. No one cut in with a rule before hearing the full thought. It was not because of fame. It was because the incident had left a mark where it mattered most. One evening, after a long flight, she sat alone in the crew lounge watching rain slide down the windows. Another crew entered, talking about a different storm on a different route. They spoke about how quickly conditions had changed, how close it had been. One of them said, almost casually, "We turned early. Didn't want to wait." She looked up, surprised. Not because of the words, but because of how natural they sounded. That was when she understood something important. The story was no longer about her. It was becoming part of shared thinking. A quiet shift in mindset. Later that week, she received an invitation to participate in a simulator review. Not to defend herself, but to help test new scenarios. The simulation recreated fast-growing storms, delayed information, conflicting instructions. Situations where waiting felt safe until suddenly it wasn't. She sat in the simulated cockpit and watched younger pilots face the same tension she once had. Some hesitated. Some acted too late. Others made early decisions and explained their reasoning clearly. When the session ended, she did not lecture. She simply shared one idea: trust the data, she said, but trust your senses too. The plane talks to you if you listen. The words were simple, but they stayed with people. Outside work, life remained ordinary. She bought groceries. She called family. She walked through quiet streets, unnoticed. Sometimes she overheard conversations about flying, about fear, about trust in pilots. She never joined those conversations. She did not need to. One afternoon, a message arrived from someone she had never met. A passenger from the flight who had only recently learned what had happened. The message was careful, respectful. It said they had been afraid of flying for years. That flight had been difficult, but afterward, something changed. They realized how much thought and responsibility sat in the cockpit. They booked another flight. Then another. The woman pilot read the message slowly. It touched her in a way praise never could. Fear turning into trust. That was real impact. Not everything was positive. There were still critics. Still voices saying, rules must never bend. Still debates in rooms she was not part of. She understood those views. Aviation needs structure. Safety depends on discipline, but discipline without judgment is fragile. She did not argue publicly. She believed arguments rarely change minds. Examples do. On a later flight, far from storms and headlines, she faced a smaller decision. Nothing dramatic. A choice about altitude, fuel efficiency, comfort. She thought carefully, balanced all factors, and made the call. The flight was smooth. No one noticed. And that was exactly how it should be. She began to understand that the true value of that earlier decision was not the lives saved in one moment, but the lives protected in future, moments that would never be recorded as stories, flights that would land quietly, storms that would be avoided early, crews that would trust their judgment without fear of punishment. The real success was invisible. Late one night, cruising above a blanket of clouds, she looked at the instruments glowing softly. In the dark, everything was stable, predictable, calm. She thought about how close order and chaos sit in aviation, separated by minutes, sometimes seconds. She also thought about how responsibility feels heavier when you carry it alone, but lighter when systems Learn from it. She did not see herself as someone who broke rules. She saw herself as someone who respected the purpose behind them. Safety is not obedience, she believed. Safety is care. As the plane moved steadily toward its destination, she made a quiet promise to herself to keep flying the same way she always had, with attention, with humility, with courage when needed. No matter how many years passed, no matter how technology improved, there would always be moments where humans had to choose, and when that moment came again, she hoped the sky would be filled with pilots who understood one simple truth. Sometimes, the safest path is not the one written on paper. It is the one seen clearly by someone willing to take responsibility, long before danger becomes visible to everyone else. Years later, the flight was rarely mentioned, but its effect was still present. Not as a story told loudly, but as a quiet influence in how people thought and acted. The woman pilot had grown older, more experienced, and more comfortable with silence. She no longer needed validation. She measured success differently now. One morning, before sunrise, she stood on the tarmac watching another aircraft prepare for departure. The air was cool and still. The sky showed no signs of trouble. Everything looked perfect. Yet she knew that calm skies could change without warning. They always could. Inside the briefing room, a young crew discussed their route. Weather reports showed a possible system forming later in the day. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic. Still, the woman pilot listened closely. She asked a few simple questions. How fast was the system growing? How confident were the models? What were the backup options? The room grew more focused, not tense. Just aware that she did not tell her story. She did not need to. Her questions alone were enough. As the flight progressed, the weather began shifting earlier than expected. The clouds thickened. Wind patterns changed. The signs were subtle, but they were there. The crew noticed. They talked. They decided early to adjust their path. No orders were defied. No alarms were triggered. The decision was smooth and accepted. Plane landed safely, like thousands of others every day. That was the moment she realized something deeply important. The greatest impact of her decision years ago was not the headlines or discussions. It was this: a crew acting early, calmly, confidently, without fear. That evening, she sat alone in a quiet terminal, watching passengers hurry past. Each of them carried their own worries, their own plans. None of them thought about storms, fuel margins, or decision windows. They trusted the system completely, and the system, she knew, was stronger now. She reflected on how close she once came to doubt. How easily fear of consequences could have silenced her judgment. How simple it would have been to follow orders and let events unfold. Many people believe courage is loud, that it announces itself, that it demands attention. She knew better. Real courage feels lonely. It feels heavy. It feels like choosing responsibility when no one is watching and no one is promising praise. She had carried that weight once. Others were carrying it now. A message came through her phone from a former trainee. Short and simple. Today I made a call early. It felt hard, but right. Thank you. She read it twice, then placed the phone face down. That was enough. Later, that night, flying above a sea of clouds, she watched the instruments glow softly again. Technology had improved. Systems were smarter. But the core truth remained unchanged. Machines provide information. Humans provide judgment. No system could replace the feeling in the controls, the subtle shift in air, the instinct built from years of listening. She thought about the 418 lives from that long-ago flight. Most of them would never know her name. Some might not even remember the turbulence. Their lives had moved on, full of new moments, new joys, new struggles. That was the greatest reward. She did not want to be remembered. She wanted people to live. As the aircraft moved steadily through the night, she felt calm. Not because everything was predictable, but because she trusted the balance between rules and judgment. She understood now that safety is not about perfection. It is about awareness, about acting before fear turns into panic, about choosing responsibility over comfort. Soon, she would land again. Another routine arrival. Another quiet ending. No applause. No attention. Just a plane reaching the ground. Safely as it should. And somewhere far below, lives continuing without interruption. That was the legacy she believed in. Not a story about breaking rules, but a story about understanding when rules need a human heart to guide them. Asterisk, the flight that changed everything slowly faded into memory for most people, but its meaning stayed, alive in quieter ways. For the woman pilot, life continued as it always had, one flight after another, one decision after another. There was no ceremony to mark the years, no final statement. Just motion, responsibility, and trust carried through. The sky. One evening, after completing her last flight of the week, she stood alone near the runway fence. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in soft orange and gold. Planes rose and landed in steady rhythm, each one carrying stories no one on the ground could see. She thought about how fragile safety can be, and how strong it becomes when people take it seriously. Long ago, she had made a choice that placed weight on her shoulders alone. At the time, she did not know how far that moment would travel. She only knew what was in front of her. A storm growing faster than expected, a narrow window closing. Lives depending on judgment. Now, years later, she saw the ripple of that choice. In the way people worked, pilots spoke up sooner. Controllers listened more carefully. Training emphasized thinking, not just following. The system had not been weakened by her decision. It had matured. She remembered the fear she felt afterward. The waiting, the reviews, the uncertainty. She remembered wondering if it had all been worth it. Standing there now, watching another aircraft lift smoothly into the sky, she had her answer. Somewhere out there were 418 people living full lives. Some had families. Some had started new jobs. Some had faced hardships and joys she would never know. Their lives had continued without interruption. That was the quiet miracle. She had never met them. They had never met her. Yet they were connected by one invisible thread of time and choice. She knew that stories often look for clear heroes and clear endings. Real life is rarely that simple. There was no single moment where everything stopped and changed forever. There was just one decision, followed by another, followed by years of small improvements and quiet learning. As darkness settled, the lights along the runway came on. Each light was small on its own, but together they formed a clear path. That was how she saw safety now. Not as one bold act, but as many small lights placed carefully in the right direction. Before leaving, she checked her phone one last time. A message had arrived earlier from an airline safety group. They were updating guidelines again, adding more space for pilot discretion during rapidly changing weather. No mention of her. No credit given. She smiled. Recognition was never the goal. At home that night, she placed her uniform neatly away and sat by the window. The sky above was calm and full of stars. She thought about all the pilots flying at that very moment, making decisions in quiet cockpits, trusting their training and their instincts. She hoped they felt supported. She hoped they knew that judgment was not a weakness. It was a responsibility. People often ask what makes someone brave. Is it fearlessness? Confidence? Defiance? She believed bravery was something simpler. Bravery was caring enough to act early. Bravery was choosing responsibility even when the outcome was uncertain. Bravery was accepting consequences so others would not face them. She had done that once. She would do it again if needed. As sleep slowly came, she felt peace. Not the kind that comes from praise, but the kind that comes from knowing you acted with care, the world would never know how close that flight had come to danger. And that was exactly how it should be, because the best safety stories are the ones that end quietly, with planes landing on time. With families reunited, with lives continuing, untouched by the storms that never reached them. That was the real ending, not a rule. Broken. Just 418 people arriving home safely, never knowing how one calm voice in the sky chose responsibility over hesitation. In that unseen choice, everything that mattered was saved.